all over satisfied. We are going to continue with the next topic, which is unrecognized states in the post-Soviet space. The chair is going to hold Jan Kopron from the Institute of Political Studies from Charles University, and the first speaker is Jakša from the University of York.
Before we will start, I want to say 2 or 3 things. The first one is that I have received a note that I should be a little bit harsher as far as time is concerned, therefore at least for 15 minutes, no more. And I will show you this small card. No limit will approve. Further, I would like to note that Dr. Romancov will not be here today as he is sick, unfortunately. So, let's start.
Let me start by joining the other speakers and thanking the organizers for inviting me. I have very good memories from the last year's conference, so I'm very happy to be here. Can I have the... Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about the ontological security of post-Soviet de facto states. Firstly, I'll establish my theoretical framework. I'll talk about the perspective of ontological security. I'll try to show how it applies to the study of de facto states and a fortiori to the study of post-Soviet de facto states. I'll talk a little bit about ontological security and honor and identity in the context of the Caucasus, which will also serve as a cultural and historical context for the case study of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria between 1996 and 1999 during its de facto independence. I start with a series of distinctions between dichotomies between non-recognition and non-engagement. Whereas non-recognition effectively puts de facto state in a situation of illegality, where a parent state can take military action and reincorporate it, restore its territorial integrity. Non-engagement doesn't threaten physical security per se. It establishes illegitimacy and threatens ontological security, I would argue. Threatens the self-identity of the de facto state. In terms of theoretical approaches, realism in international relations focuses very much on physical security, on the survival of the state, whereas constructivism makes more emphasis on identity factors. So the ontological security perspective is actually derives from realism. It's not a concept that is native to international relations, although it was proposed by Lang, who was a Scottish psychiatrist, and then theorized further by Anthony Giddens, British sociologist. Giddens defines it as a sense of continuity in order and order in events, sort of a sense that a de facto state or any state has of being equal to itself throughout history. States pursue self-identity needs that sometimes may seem irrational, but I argue that the ontological security perspective can allow us to see these, the pursuit of the needs themselves as rational. I draw on Jennifer Mitzen's and Rand Steele's work on ontological security and international relations, where Steele focuses sort of on the individual, on the self and the narratives that sustain it. Mitzen is much more interested in interaction and how interaction shapes identity. And I use more, I agree more with Mitzen when it comes to de facto states. I think it's useful to apply ontological security to the study of de facto states for several reasons. One is that we can observe a sort of blurred border, blurred distinction between domestic and foreign policy, domestic and foreign areas in de facto states, which means that these entities are much more susceptible for foreign influences. They're much more opened up, and small things like the change in Freedom House index can have a big impact on how the entity perceives itself, on how confident the elites are in pursuing their foreign policy objectives, or visits by certain dignitaries can boost the confidence of people in a de facto state. Non-engagement, of course, isolates de facto states, and that is also, for instance, on the individual level, we can observe when an individual is isolated, they turn into themselves, and they start questioning their identity. And I argue that this is scalable up to also the relations in the international community. I think it's furthermore applicable, and to an even larger extent, to post-Soviet de facto states. Firstly, because if we look at the secessions in post-war, in the post-Soviet period, they were largely based on ontological arguments, ontological grounds, identity grounds. And like, for instance, Kosovo, where we have the so-called case of remedial secession, places like Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Nagorno-Karabakh, seceded not in order to establish their physical security, but in order to establish their ontological security, in order to preserve their identity. Furthermore, since these entities arose from violent conflicts, in many cases they developed siege mentality that they then tried to overcome different kinds of identity building, nation building. Again, if I take the case of Abkhazia, the policy that sort of was an answer to this was of ethnocracy, sort of trying to reassert the political position of the Abkhaz minority at the time. So it felt threatened not just physically by Georgia or even ontologically by the dependence on Russia, but also within the entity. Now, when I'm talking about the Caucasus, one thing that is very important to note is the cultural context. Especially in the North Caucasus, the presence of Adat, which is sort of the honorary code, informal code. And in this context, the loss of isolation, the loss of honor the isolation is interpreted as a loss of honor. So if an individual loses his or her honor, the society will respond by effectively isolating them. The individuals will not be spoken to, they will be effectively ostracized from the community. And I argue that this is very much the case for the de facto states, because the international community treats them in the same way. Even if the international community sort of wants to only showcase that they uphold the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity, this message doesn't really come across often to the people because they believe simply that they are being isolated as a result of the loss of honor, of some rule that they have broken. And although honor serves integrative and protective function, and this is my main argument, de facto states often try to preserve or regain honor and in this way maintain ontological security, but by doing that they can undermine their physical security. And this brings me to the case study of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, as I said, starting with August 1996, after the first Chechen War, which was won by the Chechen separatists, and going all the way to 1999, also August 99, when this entity was militarily defeated following an invasion of the Russian army, following the Second Chechen War, and reincorporated into its parent state, the Russian Federation. Here I touch upon something that was already mentioned by Because, and this is that in at least this case, identity precedes interaction. So when the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria came into existence, it already had a strong national identity based on historical development. Chechens are a very old nation. It also had a very strong sort of ethnic homogeneity, but yet, despite these factors, its ontological security was undermined. It was undermined in a way that, whereas in some other post-Soviet de facto states, elites embarked on the project of state building stable democratic institution, Chechnya descended into chaos. So we had the rule of warlords. Much of the territory at some point was not in the control of the government or the president in Grozny. There were widespread kidnappings, violence, economy was in shambles. So we have a very difficult ontological situation in which we also have a conflict between the nationalists and the Islamists. And the nationalists who sort of try to maintain control over the secular state, secular nationalist state, Aslan Mashkadov, were losing ground to the Islamists who sort of didn't see a possibility of simply restoring Chechnya's honor within Chechnya. There were attempts to reconcile the two. Chechnya was becoming progressively more Islamist. It adopted Sharia law, it dissolved the parliament, it virtually became an Islamic republic. But this was still not enough, as the old structures meant that the corruption was still ingrained, and sort of there was this cognitive dissonance between the ideals and the practice that had to be resolved. And I argue that here also the foreign policy, the foreign interaction of Chechnya played a large role, whereas entities like Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, they tried to appeal to the West, and they had to, they also had to engage in projects of democratization. They had to show that they respect the human rights, whereas Chechnya interacted a lot with the Gulf countries, and to show that they are truly committed, to show that they are also ideologically compatible, they had to progressively become more and more fanatical, to the point that when they tried to restore their ontological security, to regain their honor, they invaded Dagestan. So the idea was to abandon Chechnya, to abandon the project of state building in Chechnya for a larger entity that is going to be built on different political and moral foundations. My conclusions here are that not only, or not necessarily that behind sovereignty lies anarchy, as realists would have it, but also that behind routines, chaos lurks. So that isolation of de facto states can lead to ontological insecurity. If we prevent these entities from establishing foreign policy routines, from establishing diplomatic relations, we lose the possibility to influence them. And another sort of power can monopolize these interactions, as we've seen with Gulf countries, or even the Taliban-led Afghanistan in Chechnya. The ontological security perspective could also help us to explain the continued existence of de facto states through analyzing these routines. And I argue that it would also provide better understanding of the new de facto states. For instance, the ones in eastern Ukraine, which seem to have a pretty shaky ontological security at the moment. First, they wanted to join the Russian Federation. This was rejected. Then they embarked on the project of creating Novorossiya. This was abandoned too. And now they're struggling sort of to define what they really are. And I'll stop here and wait for your questions. Thank you.
Now,
short comment, we found a watch. It's probably a women watch. So if somebody is looking for them, it will be a thank you.
Oh, funny.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation, and especially to Martin and all the people involved in organizing the conference, because I know all the big effort that involves to organize this kind of event. So I'm, like all the others, I'm very happy to be here. So, well, precisely continuing to what my predecessors were mentioning now, when talking about the Donetsk and Lugansk, let's say, People's Republics, as they denominate themselves. It's funny also how quickly geopolitics allows sometimes the unforeseeable to happen, because 3 years ago we would be talking that there would be a Donetsk People's Republic. I mean, it would be like a joke. But now it's like something that became like a matter of discussion, no? It's like, so that's why, in that sense, I'll try to mention a little bit the context to understand how it's very important to understand the geopolitical role Ukraine has, and how it became a goal for like 3 completely opposite projects, each one with a different intentions. By one side, the NATO enlargement that they had for many years tried to pursue to Ukraine to become one day a NATO member, something that for Russia was considered a menace. I mean, since the fall of the Soviet Union, they have always felt that NATO enlargement was against their interest, and they were like feeling encircled. The EU Eastern Partnership, that is like also a very complex issue, because it's like every member of the EU will tell you something different of what's the specific goal of the Eastern Partnership. I mean, while the Polish or Lithuanian government will tell you that it's like a step before becoming a EU member, Germany and France will tell you completely something different. No, but at the end, the fact is that it tries to build an area that is a middle ground between Russia and the EU, and that's why also for Russia it was a completely antagonic project to what they have been trying to build, that is the Eurasian Union, that now counts with 5 members, maybe 6 with Tajikistan. Not clear the position with Uzbekistan, but that's it. But that they have not been able to push forwards in the European side to incorporate more countries, precisely because of it. The intention of these other actors to have Ukraine. I mean, these are part of the reasons that push into the. I won't speak too much in the Ukrainian crisis, but it's also important to have present the linguistic division in Ukraine. I mean, here we can see, I mean, the percentage of people that speak Russian as mother tongue. That, as you all know perfectly, I mean, it's like in the eastern part they speak Russian a lot more than in the west, and also. And that has created is part of the, together with other divisions present, is part of the ethnic linguistical division that has remained. And it's like, and identities have developed completely different in West Ukraine, cities like Ivano-Frankovsk or Lvov or Lviv in Ukrainian, that were incorporated to the Soviet Union only after 1945, or regions at the Donbass that have been always strongly Russian-speaking, or not to say Crimea, that was always like also with the biggest percentage of Russians. There's also another important political actor that in Ukraine, maybe one of the most important, that are the oligarchs. The oligarchs have a completely different model that related to the oligarchs, Russian oligarchs or other oligarchs in the post-Soviet sphere. Here they managed to become the control of the political power. I mean, it's like the way they influence most of the parties, the political parties, and they can change sides. It's a very important thing to understand the political changing moods of Ukraine. I mean, it's like most of them that were during the Maidan, that were obviously defending Yanukovych, they started to change sides, and at the end they were all sustaining the Maidan and sustaining the opposition, and when at the end, and their interest, even though deteriorated, I mean, they still have a lot of political power, and they control many of the representatives of the parliament. So at the end, it's like that statistic that I would like to know is like how much it has changed, but Taras Cruz is sustaining in 2008 that they had 28% of the 25% of the GDP. That's something, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, if you can consider that 50 persons control 85% of the GDP, you can consider that the political power. So we go to quickly to the end of the Ukrainian crisis. I mean, like after the Western pressure started to increase to Yanukovych to depart, there was this negotiation that was followed, that it served like an excuse, or let's say like the point from which Russia changed completely the attitude toward what was happening in the relation with the West, because there was a sort of negotiation during the whole crisis with Germany and with France especially. They had been talking in many senses, but after these agreements were held, that it seemed that the crisis was getting over here in February 2014. It seems that there was a kind of agreement between the EU members and Russia to end the crisis. So that would be Yanukovych would be leaving by December, a government of national unity, all armed militias would keep weapons, and all the political parties and the opposition had agreed. What happened the day after this agreement was precisely between the foreign ministers of France, Germany, Poland, and the ambassador of the Russian Federation, Yanukovych. Just the day after, Yanukovych was ousted, and the parliament voted to oust also to select Turchinov as acting president without following the impeachment procedure in the Ukrainian constitution, and that served exactly as an excuse to say so Russia could say, okay, we had an agreement, and the next day you were not respecting this agreement. So I mean, it's like that means I have to deal with the issue in another way. So that changed completely the response by the Russian Federation, where by one side first in Crimea, but in the Donbass case that is the precisely referring. Many people, with or without Russian support, started not to recognize the new Ukrainian authorities, and by April 2014 they were like occupied government buildings, and it was already being declared the existence of these people's republics. Now it was like very improvised. Many of the local authorities sympathized with the movement. It's important to say that since the beginning there were two facts that were contrasting. One, the Donbass has always enjoyed a very strong local identity. The Donbass identity is not pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian, it's Donbass. It's like they are always like, for many different reasons. So look, they were from before, I mean, from Soviet times, and before Soviet times, it was like one of the richest regions in Ukraine. So they always had like this self-consciousness of that, how they were like the best developed area in the country. If we add also the fact that most of the oligarchs were from that region, that had allowed for many different reasons to the Donbass region to receive more governmental support, more subsidies, more so you could find a better life level, or the standards were not so deteriorated as in the rest of Ukraine. Instead, what happened when this movement started, I mean, the government in Kiev suddenly declared them a terrorist organization, and by one side they were declaring that they were pretending to dialogue, but that the others, they were already defining them as terrorists. It's like, and also, well, at the end, sometimes there's a political use of the word terrorist, because it's like saying that we don't want to find like any kind of middle ground, and the civil war exactly, I mean, got the issue because there was like many many people in the panel mentioned before. Sometimes the fact of feeling you as an aggressor makes you, I mean, develop more local identity. You know? So we mentioned about the Donbass, that is, they have a strong local identity. Also, if you were in Ukraine during the 90s or 10 years ago, Independence Day was never like a big holiday. Instead, like the Miners' Day, Shakhtyor's it was like the most important party, and many Soviet holidays were more celebrated in the Donbass than in the rest of Ukraine. So the local identity had these mixed symbols, but to say like we're different from you. And what happens when the fighting starts and they're completely different positions from what the rest of the Ukrainian territory and what's happening in the Donbass, because the Donbass I mean, they leave the bombings by the Ukrainian Air Force also reinforce this local animosity, because even if justified or not by a military or point of view, the fact is that for the population, it was they were feeling like the ones being aggressed by the Ukrainian army. So the local rebels also it's very interesting the role of the local rebels, because it's like obviously there's Russian support. If you go to the area, it's kind of hidden, but it's not. I mean, it's notable. So it's like. But also there are a lot of the local population that even if they don't like the current status, they look like something like the lesser evil. No, it's like so if you go to Donetsk, I mean, some months before it was just like that. You find the rebels with their machine guns, I mean, traveling around. I mean, it's like walking, going to clubs, I mean, they can go to or restaurants or something, and interacting with the local people. And something that is, well, it's weird. I mean, it's like, but still is like, but also accepted. A lot of people fled. It's important also to notice. I mean, there were more than 1 million displaced in the area. Okay. And also that caused a huge mobility. Many people from the Donbass, the ones related to the oil, because also all the enterprises related to the oligarchs, they fled. The oligarchs, most of them didn't stay. I mean, with their businesses, they went to Kiev. So many of the people that work in those areas also went to other areas, either to Russia, many cities, different cities in South Russia, or in Crimea, or in Krasnodar, or Rostov. And others went to Kiev. No? So also, at the end, what happened? Crimea, well, you know, became de facto Russian territory, and the jure for Russian law is completely incorporated from the legal point of view for Russia. And instead, the rebels continue to control the area, in which there have been Minsk agreements. I will try to mention something about the Minsk agreements quick. There's like. Also, severe economic problems, not only in Donetsk and Lugansk. Let's say they feel more the effects of the war in Donetsk and Lugansk, but also the economic situation in the whole Ukraine is catastrophic. I mean, the level of inflation, the hryvnia has lost a lot of value. But here is a kind of semi-paralyzed public services in many senses. And also the fact that there are like all the bank system is closed. They have no more access to the Ukrainian pensions, to the Ukrainian subsidies, to all the money, because Ukraine is still a very central government. I mean, most of the budget, the regional budget, comes from Kiev. So it became a sort of paralysis in that sense. There was this failed idea, as Urban already mentioned. I mean, to create the Novorossiya state. Exactly using some elements like because it's not clear. I mean, what elements you can find. It's like sometimes like the Orthodox Church, sometimes like the Russia, sometimes the Soviet symbols. In the most important square in Donetsk, there's also a flag from Che Guevara. I mean, you can find it. So it's like it's a lot of mixed symbols that are trying to build something new. But there's also Novorossiya TV. I mean, it's like also they have their own TV channel that is working, and it's like and obviously, like exactly the same as the Ukrainian government, creating this identity about the war. Because by one side, if you turn on Ukrainian TV these days, it's all about the war and this patriotic story and how they are defending their country against the invasion. And also in Donetsk and Lugansk, they are also creating this patriotic identity of how they are defending themselves against the invasion. I mean, the so-called the project Novorossiya failed, or they mention it's frozen. It's like right now, the Donetsk People's Republic is recognized only by South Ossetia, and it's not clear to know what's the current population, because many people fled, some went back, and it's not. They had a sort of referendum, obviously, with no international standards in the way it was held. In fact, not even Russia recognized it. The word from Lavrov were we respect. It's like not just to say we don't recognize, but we just respect the decision from the people of the Donbass. And sort of elections in which many people also were paid to go to voting. I mean, it's like many locals said, okay, they told us they were going to give us the pension, so well, I went to vote, and there was like, it was not like, and it's not even clear how many people voted. I mean, it's like the numbers between the Ukrainian authorities and the Donetsk authorities are completely different. But altogether, even if it has not at all any democratic standards, but there's also a sort of passive acceptance of this status quo. And also the same in Lugansk, that they also have the referendum and elections. And the Minsk agreements have, they have been respected only in a certain sense. Where goes Ukraine? I mean, it's just to say where these are like extreme positions. While like from a nationalist Russian point of view and from the idealistic Ukrainian view, I mean, how could Ukraine finish? But at the end, three political scenarios: like, or Ukrainian government takes control, considering autonomy. Brainstorming scenario that seems for me the more likable in the sense that because for Russia is very comfortable, or Donetsk and Lugansk became independent. So to conclude, precisely at the end, it's all related to a geopolitical struggle. The solution will depend on the state of the relation between Russia, the United States, and NATO. Russia and the US have a lot of themes and issues in the agenda, Syria and Iran and other things. So obviously it will enter in that part of the negotiation. And for Russia, the most important thing is to guarantee that Ukraine won't become a NATO member. So, and just to conclude, if Ukraine, would like, it's very important that they have to acknowledge that there's a multi-ethnic and multi-linguistic territory. It's like, and to try to build an ethno-national state in a multi-ethnic territory has been very dangerous and very costly in all the post-Soviet space, because sometimes that has been also like one of the reasons that has pushed to increase the conflicts. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now I would like to introduce Kopeček from Australia.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to speak in this wonderful event. Before I start my presentation, I just ask Jan to chair, because we are short of time. If you consider my presentation boring, then simply give me the 5 minutes and I will quickly conclude and give the floor to my colleague Tomáš. I'm a political cultural geographer, and unlike most of my colleagues, I prefer to focus on the micro level analysis of conflict. So my topic is focused on Nagorno-Karabakh and on the role of civil society organization and transformation of the Karabakh conflict. Because there are many students, I will just briefly introduce you to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict itself. Nagorno-Karabakh during Soviet times was an enclave, predominantly Armenian, populated within the territory of Azerbaijan SSR. And in late 1980s, so-called Karabakh movement started to demand to transfer the autonomous region from jurisdiction of Azerbaijani SSR to the jurisdiction of Armenian SSR. This was rejected by Azerbaijan and also by Moscow. And after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Nagorno-Karabakh declared independence. The skirmishes between ethnic Armenians and Azerbaijanis developed into a full-scale war between those two nations. And it ended in 1994 by signing a ceasefire. It was the Armenian side who was, let's say, more successful in the war, conquering or gaining not only almost all territory of the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region, but also vast territories around Karabakh, constituting so-called security belt from the point of view of the Karabakh Armenians. If you compare the outcome of the war with the, let's say, initial demands of the Karabakh populations, you can see that the war ended in a different way. Nagorno-Karabakh wanted to be united with Armenia, but the outcome of the war was Nagorno-Karabakh declaring de facto independence. It was caused from, I would say, very prosaic reasons, because Armenia as a newly independent state simply did not want to openly annex territory of its neighbor, because it would then be considered by international community as an aggressor. So Karabakh Armenians basically chose a second best option from their point of view, just declaring independence. The important question in this conflict is whether Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh in Armenia as a distinct polity, or it's a kind of Armenian puppet. It is occupied territory, as is the claim of the Azerbaijani side. I have to thank Nina Kaspersen, Professor Kaspersen, because in her presentation she mentioned that the facto states are not merely not only the puppets or not only some occupied territories. They also are, let's say, polities of their own. And this is also my argument that Nagorno-Karabakh is not only a puppet of Armenia, it's a polity of its own, and that's its own interests. Basically, when I interviewed one Armenian journalist and political analyst in Yerevan this year, he let's say, I think described the situation very well. He said that Nagorno-Karabakh Republic and Armenian Republic are one economic, culture, and security unit. However, despite the fact that the Karabakhian Armenian political elites are interconnected, both entities are two distinct political entities with their own interests. I'll explain in more detail. Of course, they are one economic unit because Karabakh uses Armenian dram as its currency. 50% of Karabakh's budget comes from Armenia. It's one culture entity, of course. It's also one security unit because side by side with Karabakh troops, there are also Armenian soldiers deployed in Nagorno-Karabakh. But for last, let's say, 20 years, Karabakh also has developed its own institutions, its own political parties. So it's an entity that is, of course, unrecognized, it is dependent heavily on Armenia, but also it has its own leverages how to influence the decision-making process of Armenian politics in general. Somebody already mentioned the situation in 1997, 1998 when the former Karabakh president became a prime minister, later even the, let's say, later even the president of Armenian Republic. Well, and now, what's the problem? One of the most crucial problems of the conflict is I would say, the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh is not direct part of the negotiation process. It has basically two reasons, of such a state. First one is that when Robert Kocharyan became prime minister and then president of Armenia, he basically declared that he would negotiate also on the behalf of Nagorno-Karabakh as former president of this self-declared entity. Second reason is that Azerbaijani side simply claims that these territories are occupied by Armenia and prefer to negotiate with Armenia. So I think it was Ekiberg who mentioned this fact that the parent states prefer isolation of those unrecognized or de facto entities. And now let's move to basically the crucial point of my analysis. We have a concept of peace building, which says that there are basically three tracks of diplomacy, three levels. Track 1 between the political elites, track 2 between civil societies, and track 3 among the individuals in society in general. If we admit that Karabakh is a polity of its own, or has developed into a polity of its own, the problem is that there is no dialogue between the top leadership of Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan. It's not only blocked to a great extent like the dialogue between Armenian and Azerbaijani, but virtually non-existent. So let's focus on the second track, on the track 2 diplomacy, dialogue between civil society organizations. According to the theory, civil society organizations, or NGOs, as we prefer, should play a positive role in step-by-step transformation of the conflict. These should be the actors, the players, who should somehow overcome the barriers, the trenches between those sides, trying to establish some at least basic level of trust between those two societies. And my research is based on the field research in both Armenia and Karabakh. I focused on this track to diplomacy, and I focused on the Karabakh NGOs. How do they perform in the track to diplomacy? And I meet some very interesting point within the theory, because very often, not all literature, but significant part of literature simply supposes that NGOs are the positive players. But in my opinion, this is not true. Well, if you see these definitions by World Bank and some other authors, you see this positive stance, this positive this positive side of the definitions. However, as other scientists argue, well, civil society is not the kind of rational player per se with clearly articulated interests and noble goals. It's simply a set of diverse, often contradictory goals, interests. So one cannot say that CSOs are those who only promote conflict transformation. There are also CSOs or NGOs that hinder conflict transformation, that have different interests, that transform the conflict to a more peaceful situation. So I would like to offer you basically 3 mini case studies of 3 Nagorno-Karabakh CSOs. And I think they represent 3 distinct models of how NGOs in de facto states are involved in the conflict transformation process. The first one is Nagorno-Karabakh Committee Helsinki Initiative 92. I mention this organization because it's I think well-known NGO in Nagorno-Karabakh that took place in many important events. And this is the case of NGO that is really active, that is really purposely active in conflict transformation, striving to make a difference, striving to really build some at least basic level of trust between the Karabakh Armenian and Azerbaijani society. They realized several very interesting programs and projects. They facilitated visits of Azerbaijani NGOs in Nagorno-Karabakh and vice versa. They also realized a lot of am I boring or am I boring? They also realized a couple of trust-building projects like Yellow Tulips. We focused, if I remember correctly, on the missing soldier, which is a topic very, I would say, touchy for all the society, for both societies, for the families of the missing soldiers. And they also started to work with the Karabakh Armenian population, because when I interviewed one of the leader, he told me, I think that if we negotiate any kind of compromise, some former Azerbaijani inhabitants and refugees will come back. We have to prepare the society for such a solution, how improbable it is. And he even started organizing events like courses of Azerbaijani language, like evenings with Azerbaijani cuisine. But to my best knowledge, most of the participants of these events were the members of the organization and close friends. So it does not seem that this was successful. However, this organization is a kind of CSO that really tries to make some difference, though we can, let's say, have some doubts about the outcomes of the endeavor. The second time is one small organization based on one of the smaller cities in Nagorno-Karabakh that basically focuses on Armenian, ethnic Armenian refugees in Nagorno-Karabakh. When I approached this organization, I had maybe a slightly naive assumption that there can be some basic level of mutual sympathy between the refugees. The Armenians were now from Azerbaijan, the Azerbaijani from Nagorno-Karabakh. I would expect some basic level of understanding. We both are victims of the war. However, it seems that at least this organization doesn't think this way. When I asked the leader if they have any contacts with the Azerbaijani side, if they somehow struggle to make some basic level of trust, he told me no. And why? The war is over. We won. We are, let's say, focusing on social status, legal status of the refugees. Why to negotiate, why to assist some dialogue across the ceasefire line? This is another type of organization, simply which does not undertake any activities, let's say, in the field of conflict transformation. And the third type of such organization is another one, important. CSO, so I mentioned it by name because they have also their websites and everything is visible on the net. It's Nargazi Art Institute, or Pan-Armenian organization, which is also a branch in Shusha or Shushi. Well, Shusha or Shushi is one of the cities heavily damaged by the war. It used to be the center of Azerbaijani population in Nagorno-Karabakh, and all of the Azerbaijani population had to flee the city when it was conquered in 1992. So the city still basically is mostly in ruins. There are some reconstruction works, the museum reconstructed, mosque is reconstructed to a certain extent. But this is still a city heavily damaged by the war. And of course, Nargazi Art Institute is doing a lot of things to overcome, let's say, this unfavored situation. It brings there some kind of art. It organizes art courses for youth people, summer camps, teaching English, etc., etc. But if you focus better on the activities, you realize that there is simply no space for the Azerbaijani history of the city. And in my opinion, when I saw their work, I think it's a lot of work for, let's say, bringing some life into the city. That they seem to be completely, let's say, downplaying the Azerbaijani part of the history of the city, which is let's say, very problematic if we admit that in case of negotiation solution of the conflict, refugees, I think as refugees will come back. Because we can discuss the probability of such a situation. Okay, this was basically all my presentation. I have to say that it's based on a field research that was realized in Karabakh, Armenia, a couple of years ago, and after a few years of waiting for a decision, it was accepted for one British journal. So these were just excerpts from this research, and hopefully a couple of months we can read this research in its entirety. Thank you for patience, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now we will have a very special presentation as I have to move from University of Ostrava.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure if this is a presentation. I think that I prepared so difficult presentation even for me that I need the computer here, so it's maybe different. I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful conference, and I would like to thank Vincenc that he was before me, because we are having very similar topic on the role of practical diplomacy and conflict transformation. I think I don't need, maybe I will be a little bit louder, so that's fine. And I'm not focusing on Nagorno-Karabakh, I'm focusing on Abkhazia, so the title of it is the role of civil society organizations in Georgian-Abkhazian conflict. Here is the same peace building pyramid just on the beginning to show what I was focusing on, because I was focusing here on practical diplomacy, so it means the connections between civil society organizations from one part of the conflict and civil society organizations in the second part of the conflict. Because if the conflict is frozen on the political level, then, as Vincenc said, then the possibility to transform the conflict can be via track to diplomacy. And as the theory is saying, the Norbert Roppers, that civil society organizations can help to organize problem-solving workshops, establishing alternative media as interreligious dialogue, and then to focus on the democratization processes. So it means that the peace building is having the vertical dimension inside of the pyramid and then the horizontal dimension between two conflict parties. And I was focusing on conflict transformation inside of Abkhazia, and my question was, what is the role of Abkhazian civil society in the conflict transformation? And I was trying to focus on internal perception of Abkhazians, what is their role of the civil society. So civil society, for me, it's a really wide concept. It means NGOs, academics, journalists, people and representatives from the church. So it was. And I had two field researches, one in 2014 and the second one in 2015. If I start with the evolution of civil society organizations in Abkhazia, we can say that there are three different periods. One was the formation of civil society, and that was in the beginning of 90s as the effects of the war situation which occurred in Abkhazia at the beginning of 90s. Then later on, the second half of 90s, it was strong political dialogue, and it was thanks to UCI process, University of California, Irvine, and then later on with another international organizations such as Berkeley Center, International Alert Conservation Resources, which was very fruitful. And then later on, since the recognition of independence of Abkhazia, the Abkhazian NGOs are focusing much more on domestic issues. It doesn't mean that they completely disappeared from the horizontal peace-building connections with the Georgians, but they are concentrating much more on the local issues. And a lot of things was written about the conflict in Abkhazia, but one part of that remains relatively understudied, and few academic texts were focusing on the internal perception. One is from Kopeček from Microcon in 2010, and then Nicoleta Pirozzi and Nana Mikaridze once again from Microcon in 2008. And they wrote that there are roughly 30 NGOs in Abkhazia which are focusing on conflict transformation. That was in 2008 and 2010. Last year and this year, when I was asking about these organizations, currently only 3 are working on peace-building projects, and that's Center for Humanitarian Programs, the Association of Women in Abkhazia, and World Without Violence. And the other 3, they are still working on peace-building projects, but they don't have currently projects. So from all of these 30 organizations currently, we are having only 6. Most of them disappeared. And still, the participation with Georgian representatives is unpopular in Abkhazian society, and the people who are having the meetings with Georgians are looking through the fingers inside of the society. When I asked on evaluation of the project, the UCI and the Schleining, I was surprised that generally it was very positive for people in Abkhazia and NGOs, and they told us that it had 3 very important things. First of all, that they lost the stereotype way of thinking about the others, because in Abkhazian journals and in Russian journals mostly the Georgians are viewed only as really hard regime that want to conquer by force the Abkhazia. So when they had the possibility to talk to each other with Georgians, they had the information from the first hand, which was very important. Second one, it was many international observers who can hear the ideas of Abkhazian society and Georgian society. So they understood it much better. And then later on, the third, that all of the people involved in these processes agreed on the necessity to resolve the conflict through peaceful means, which is not a small issue. And then later on, another thing that none of the peace-building projects currently is supported by the local government. There are no funding for peace-building initiatives inside of Abkhazia, but still there have been moral support from the government. And I think this is important to explain why. The first current president, Ram Khajimba, the former KGB officer, understand these attitudes and understand the people in the local civil society that first of all they are Abkhazian patriots. So they are not strongly anti-Russian, but they are Abkhazian patriots. So they don't give them money, but they are not oppressing, and they don't make any big obstacles for NGOs to function. And second thing, that in Russia there's no confidence for NGOs, and you know that law on foreign agents is in this area very difficult to function. So for Abkhazian organizations, even this moral support is very important that they can function, because without this, at least moral support, it would be very, very difficult for them to survive. So I told you that my presentation is very difficult even for me. So maybe I will continue without presentation. We'll see if this works or not. Yes. When I look on the role of media, there are two newspapers, very important one, Novaya and Ruzhnaya Gazeta. And these two journals, they are very pro-government, so you don't see any alternative viewpoints about the conflict. They are connected with the government and the president. There used to be Građanské občestvo for civil society, very important journal, but 5 years ago it ceased to exist. And then currently there are two independent media called Abkhazia and Abkhazian Forum, but they don't have huge readership. And as local people from civil society told us that they are not very independent, these journals, and they are based on the work of independent-minded journalists with and another very important thing is that there is lack of analytical texts in these newspapers. If you look on them, it's only 2 pages. And on these 2 pages, it's always written only that the president of Abkhazia met with the president of South Ossetia and photograph. So the role of NGOs is that they are writing this analytical text, but not for the media. So that is very important part of this analytical section. But currently, the Abkhazian and Georgian journalists don't meet each other and don't read the statements of each other. So there is the isolation even between the journalists. The role of church is even worse, because naturally the church can be the viable channel for reconciliation. But the level of hatred before churches, Abkhazian Orthodox Church and Georgian Orthodox Church, is even higher than between the societies. So church is not the viable channel for reconciliation. Even the Abkhazian Church is split into 2 organizations. Abkhazian Orthodox Church led by Vissarionopolia, and the second one, the Holy Metropolis of Abkhazia. So even inside the Abkhazian society, these 2 churches don't communicate to each other, so that's another problematic situation. But the important is that they don't meet each other and they are not the part of the peace-building project. So even if conciliation resources of the international area are organizing some problem-solving workshops, the Abkhazian Church and Georgian Orthodox Church don't participate in these meetings. The perception of the West inside of Abkhazian NGOs, if you don't speak with few people from the liberal civil society, the general attitude is bad, because they look on on the West as a friend of Georgia, and it means that you are supporting the territorial integrity of Georgia, which for Abkhazians means to attack Abkhazia and join them by force. So the general public awareness of EU values is really small, and few important international organizations, as I mentioned, International Alert, Heinrich Wellstiftung and Conciliation Resources are still active, but they are having much less projects than they used to have before. The local attitude, why they have less projects than they used to have before, it's because of financial crisis in the EU, because of the problems in Ukraine and in Syria, which are connected with this part, and because the peace process is in dead end. So that's the explanations of this situation. Russian role in the conflict transformation, of course, this is the crucial and important issue. And what is important that since 2008, when Russia recognized Abkhazia together with Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Nauru, after that you can see that Abkhazia changed its multi-vector policy, as I think that Vicky mentioned these two things. Because before that, Abkhazian politicians want to focus on the European Union and on the Russia together. Then later on, after the recognition solely, they are focusing on Russia, and Russia is the biggest partner in all spheres of what we are talking. 99% of foreign direct investments comes from Russia, 75% of international trade. People can travel only via Russia, and so on. So security guarantees. That's things. And because I think I should sum up some 3 minutes, yeah, but I think I need to sum up. So if I should summarize the role of NGOs, that currently only few NGOs are communicating with the Georgians. Either in Kali, because that's one part of Abkhazia that is inhabited mostly by Georgian citizens, or in Georgia itself. Mostly they are supporting the internal democratization of Abkhazia, which is very important to open up and to have democratic and open channels for discussion between leadership of the country and then civil society and the society. And then very important role is the analytical role in informing the citizens of Abkhazia about the events related with the conflict. Democracy for recognition strategy is not functioning anymore. That was connected with the multi-vectoral policy currently, because they are orientating only on Russia. They are not using democracy for recognition strategy roughly since 2010-2011. Strength of Russian influence represents major problem for Abkhazian civil society, because many people from local NGOs told us that they're really afraid of the stronger Russian presence in the region, because they're afraid of law and foreign agents. Because if this law and foreign agents comes to Abkhazia, it will be the biggest obstacle for a civil society, because then you cannot freely work. And CSOs operating in the current conditions don't have and don't produce the horizontal relations from the ladder-up peace-building pyramid, but they are focusing on the vertical level of democratization of the society. And the last sentence, that I'm afraid that this will not change soon, that this situation can be for a really long time.
I said at the beginning that Dr. Romanov cannot be here today, and therefore we will start with the discussion. I will ask our colleague to prepare microphone and please hands up if you like to ask something.
I want to ask Vincenc about the civil society contact in Armenia proper and Azerbaijan. As I understand, they have been underway, different kinds of dialogue. how does it compare and contrast from what you know to the dialogue that exists, or whatever things there might be in Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan?
Yeah, it was not topic of my research because I wanted to focus on the, let's say, case when the top track on diplomacy was virtually non-existent. But to my best knowledge, there are also activities involving Armenian and Azerbaijani CSOs. Usually, these activities are framed by foreign or international NGOs that basically provide a room for meeting of the young people or representatives of both civil societies. I was told by one Karabakhi Armenian leader of one civil society organization that right now there's they try to, because a couple of years ago these activities basically ceased to exist. And I was told that now they are planning launching a new round of these activities, also comprising the Karabakh side, not only Armenian Republic and Azerbaijan. However, this second round has been postponed for twice or 3 times, and they are still waiting basically until the Azerbaijani side accepts the invitation to the discussion, at least in his opinion. This is what I know about the situation.
Okay, I would like to make some comments regarding Mr. Vincenc Kopeček's presentation. To all other speakers, I would like to thank you all for your excellent presentation. I would like to say that the presentation delivered by Mr. Vincenc has personal connotation for me because I was born and grew up in the city of Shusha, and it was in 1992 May 8th that it was occupied, and it was a month before that I left the family with my family and escaped the bombardments of the Armenian invading troops. And the irony is that I consider Mr. Vincenc more lucky and more fortunate because you can visit Nagorno-Karabakh, because I cannot do it right now. And that's why my point is that unless the refugees and internal displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean Azerbaijani community of the Nagorno-Karabakh, is not back to Nagorno-Karabakh, there will be no negotiations and there will be no dialogue unless the people who fled their native land go back. And this is a part of solution. This should be part of solution. And of course, these civil society organization activities, NGOs, these are all good. But on the local level, it's just to satisfy the Armenians that saying that we are doing some job, we are building democracy, so-called. But as I told you, there is a big chance for the new full-scale war unless this is not resolved. So if it happens, of course, nobody wants the war to be restored, to be relaunched again, but if it happens, that it will devastate the whole region because the energy projects, gas pipelines, oil pipelines realized by the government of Azerbaijan, and the development of South Caucasus region is much more depends on Azerbaijani economic welfare because much more than 85% of whole economy of the South Caucasus in Azerbaijan. So can you imagine if the war starts, there will be devastation for the whole region. And as Azerbaijani people, as an Azerbaijani representative, I would like to thank the Czech government for its firm position because Czech government always supported the territorial integrity, sovereignty of the Republic of Azerbaijan, as it is supported by the United Nations Security Council, the highest security organ in the world. There are 4 resolutions adopted by the United Nations Security Council in 1993 condemning the Armenian occupation and demanding the occupying forces to withdraw from the occupied territories. and the EU position is clear. So just I wanted to make clear that whatever this de facto states or non-recognized states, whatever we call them, the main cause is the occupation, and it should be rooted out. Otherwise, there will be no appropriate solution. Thank you.
Thank you. My quick question goes to both Vincenc and Tomáš. When you did your fieldwork, did you also ask people you next to define what they mean by conflict transformation? So how do they see the conflict to be transformed, basically? And when you got some kind of answer to that, then how do these kind of civil society organizations can actually contribute to this kind of effort?
This situation or this question differs in a time. When I was first time in Abkhazia in 2009, for most of the people, there was no conflict transformation because the conflict was solved. In 2008, when Russia recognized Abkhazia, most of the people told me, we don't have conflict anymore because we are recognized by Russia, and Russia for us means almost everything. So that was 2009. And in 2014 and 15, this situation radically changed because most of the people told us that unless we are isolated, the conflict is not over. Because still we are having restrictions on goods. No foreign companies can open up their branches in Abkhazia. We almost can't travel because even though we are having Russian passports, still there is issued by Mid-Abkhazi, and when it is issued in Sukhumi, then it's very difficult to receive visa to Schengen. So you know the situation. So if they are peace builders, then they can receive the visa, but otherwise it's not so easy. So unless the Abkhazia is not isolated, then the conflict is still going on. And the only possible solution is the independence of Abkhazia. Many Abkhazians told us that if Georgia doesn't recognize us, we don't have to speak with them, because if even the moderate circles don't speak to us and don't want to recognize Abkhazia, then it's pointless discussions. And the second part is the form of associated state, because, for example, former Foreign Minister Sergei Shamba mentioned many times that Abkhazia should have some sort of associated state with Russia, but nobody understands what this means. Even though I ask politicians, people in NGOs and in public chamber, what does it actually mean in the form of associated state, nobody knows exactly.
Somebody knows. Mr. Lakova knows.
Yeah.
This is like Puerto Rico to the US.
Yes. Stanislav Lakova was the only one. You are right. But that's because he gave all of these possibilities to Peter Semnedy and engagement with South Africans. Yes, Stanislav. So maybe that's the answer to my belief.
Yeah, in the Karabakh case, it's more or less similar. So many people simply throw the conflict over it to transform. So conflict transformation was more like a scholar term approach that I use for analyzing the situation. And I mostly even did not use the term when doing interviews. The only organization basically understood what it is and told me, yes, we are doing something, trying to conflict transformation. I think was the Nagorno-Karabakh Committee of Helsinki in 1992. But they perceive this as more like trust building than conflict transformation as such. The opinion was, let's make some basic level of trust among us and the Azerbaijanis so that we can communicate. But also for them, it was, yeah, the war conflict is over, let's focus on trust building and finding some solution towards peaceful agreement.
I would like to, well, this isn't maybe a question, but I'd like to make a few points about the presentation about Ukraine and what's going on in the East. And maybe perhaps open the discussion on that, and you could comment with what you think on my points. First of all, I think the linguistic divide in Ukraine is largely exaggerated. Linguistic does not equal ethnic difference in Ukraine, unless, of course, you're talking about Hungarians or Tatars or Armenians living in Ukraine. Simply speaking, Russian does not make you Russian if you're from Ukraine. It just so happens historically that probably all 100% of the population, even to this day, does speak Russian. But on the other hand, they also speak Ukrainian. I'm not saying that there aren't any Russians there, of course there are, but language-wise, I'm from Ukraine and my native language is Russian, but I have more in common culturally and in all other ways with people from Lviv as opposed to people from Moscow, from Vladivostok. On the other hand, the actual Donbas identity, that did not exist until maybe half a year ago, when it was started to being actively created as such. When you were to ask a person from Donetsk, where are they from, they will tell you, I'm from Donetsk, just like somebody from Prague would say, I'm from Prague, or from London would say, from London, or from New York would say, New York. They wouldn't say, I'm from Donbas. When you want to talk about regional identity, a strong, very strongly felt regional identity in Ukraine, that would be Zakarpattia. The Transcarpathian region in western Ukraine, that's where the strong regional identity exists. When 5 years ago, you would never imagine of talking about the Donetsk People's Republic, but the Zakarpathian People's Republic was a possibility. They had their own flags, and they're very proud of it. They even have their own language, distinctively from that area. Whereas, I do think you sort of jumbled together this national or regional identity of Donbass versus the simple awareness of economic and industrial development of the region. Yes, people do know that, you know, it's a very industrial region of the country. And then the other point is Soviet holidays. The whole post-Soviet space celebrates sort of leftovers of Soviet holidays. It was never anything particularly special in Donetsk. Yes, Shakhtar Day, or the Coal Miners' Day, is very, very much celebrated, but then it's also the day of the founding of the city. So it's more celebrated as the day of Donetsk and Shakhtar Day because that's the most popular profession in the region. The majority of people are coal miners, so they take it as a professional holiday, not as a Soviet holiday that was left over. And then my final point is about the local rebels. The local rebels are not so much as accepted as they are feared. Simply when you have a guy in a mask walking with a gun, you don't particularly approach him and say, you know what, I'm against what you think, and you know, we don't want to separate. You sort of try to keep quiet and avoid him. I was in Donetsk in April of last year, and that was the case. The case was that you do not approach these guys, you don't talk to them. The administration that I had taken over is sort of in a remote, I don't know if you've been to Donetsk or not, it's in a remote part of the city, it's surrounded by parks, so they were kind of there, and they were isolated, and people were going on about their daily business, not really caring what is actually going on there. And when they were walking on the city, around the streets, or when they were doing, let's say, when they were involved in any kinds of criminal activity, the police would simply arrive after everything was done and make a note of it. So they were cooperating with them, so you didn't want to get in their way, simply if you valued your life or your family and so on. And then the people in Donetsk were waiting for a solution from Kiev. They were hoping that maybe this new interim government that was installed was going to actually come to Donetsk. The most that they received was, I think, Yatsenyuk arrived to the airport, held a press conference at the airport, and then flew back out. So there was no active involvement in Kiev to solve the problem. The problem could have been solved with a localized military unit within half an hour. At the very beginning, it wasn't. When the troops moved from Slaviansk to Donetsk, there's a long stretch of about 70 kilometers connecting the two cities, and it's just fields, and there's a highway. The problem could have been prevented, the separatists could have been stopped from getting into the city. That never happened. So the general sentiment in Donetsk is like this feeling of abandonment by the central government in Kiev. On top of that, right now, it's been more than a year that the conflict is going on, and of course there's all these marks of war. People have lost family members, people have lost friends, and it doesn't really matter which side killed who. Those people are never going to get their family members back or their friends. And of course now there's feelings of resentment on top of that, just like in any conflict situation. And finally, the third factor is huge propaganda from the Russian side. People in Donetsk and the region are kind of bombarded with these news, with these interpretations. And of course, now they've accepted the situation and they kind of say, well, this is the way our life is because we don't actually have anywhere to go. People who were lucky enough to go to Kiev or to other parts of Ukraine and actually stay there did. Other people, you know, you can only live so long at your friend's house or at your relative's house. They had to go back to Donetsk where their houses are. And they've kind of said, well, this is the way my life is now. What other choice do I have?
Thank you very much. Do you want to react? Please, briefly.
Thank you for your comment. I mean, yeah. I mean, first, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like cool. Yeah, of course. I mean, when I was referring, it's not the same to say Russian-speaking than Russian ethnic. It's a completely different concept. There's a 20% Russian population in Ukraine, and more or less 45% Russian-speaking. It's completely different. It's like, I didn't specify, I mean, what the numbers I was saying was to Russian-speaking, but those are some of the issues used, I mean, just to, at the end, there's only one official language, but it's all, but as a matter of fact, most of the cities, the life is done in Russian, so it's like, that creates a division, even though, accept it or not, I understand perfectly that it's a bilingual society in most of the country, and the most normal thing is to have bilingual conversations in many cases, but still, the fact that one language is recognized as official and another not, it's like creates like second-class like citizens and for many people in West Ukraine, it's important the fact that Russian keeps that way, like a second status language, and that creates a barrier because it not gives them the same status, even though they're both citizens of the same society. The Soviet holidays. It's partially true, but it's not the same. There's a big difference on how Soviet holidays are conceived. I mean, it's like, even like 9th May is a very important party, but now Poroshenko changed it to 8th May. But it's for many people in Central and East Ukraine, but it's not in West Ukraine, where they still celebrate the birthday of Stefan Bandera like a party that is like a very important party, and that also creates division. When I mentioned that the Donbass has and Donetsk, they have a local identity, that doesn't mean they're the only ones. The whole Ukraine is created among a big set of local identities. Zakarpattia and also Ivano-Frankivsk and Lvov and Crimea also. There are many different regional identities, but also it has the fact that after 20 years, Ukraine didn't manage to build a state, a real state in which the population seems identified as part of it in all sense. Because those are, instead of thinking in a multicultural, multilingual context, to try to pursue a monoethnic, monolinguistic agenda is very dangerous because precisely excludes when you have Hungarian-speaking people, Romanian-speaking people, obviously Russian-speaking people. So many different languages that you have like at the end to start recognizing this complexity. I mean, when the new parliament after the fall of Yanukovych, the first thing they approved, even though the president didn't say, was to change the law of the regional languages. That gives Russia exactly the excuse to say you're attacking the Russian-speaking population, you're attacking the rights of the minorities. There was no need to do that. If Ukraine wants to build one day a solid state, they have to first acknowledge the multicultural and multilingual society in which they are. They cannot, Ukraine is not Poland where 99% are Polish-speaking people that, I mean, they can build a state around and replicate. Ukraine, you cannot do that because exactly to pursue that agenda and considering you have Russia as a neighbor, it's a clear provocation that denies the possibility of doing. Yeah, I mean, I understand regarding then to the military mistakes. It was obvious that there were many military mistakes in the operation and how it was handled. And if instead of going to that Slavian, they would have taken Donetsk, it would have been a completely different story, maybe. But also, you have to notice some specifics. For example, the minister of the responsible of the naval forces deserted to the Russian side. Many soldiers, many people of the armed forces went to the Russian part. That is a symptom of a failed state. When the commander-in-chief of the naval forces said, okay, I'm not with Ukraine, I'm with Russia, there's a problem there. There's a problem. It's not a fact of what Russian propaganda, whatever. Okay, so, okay, oh yeah, I'll finish it there. So, okay, I'm saying 1 minute, the minute is gone. So, and then, I agree with the propaganda, of course, after 1 year it changed. I went to Donetsk before and during the war after 1 year, and it had changed completely different. It's not the same how they viewed before, and now they have a completely different, and propaganda doesn't only work in the Donetsk side, it works also in the Ukrainian side. You see Piatty Canal the whole time when you're repeating these heroic stories about how they are defending the nation against the invasor. Obviously, I mean, if they told me, what the data change you have seen in Ukraine last year, I saw a lot more Ukrainian flags on the streets. I mean, that's it, no? So yeah.
Thank you very much for your short reply. Sorry. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Therefore, right now we will have a short break, and then there will be fun panel. Thank you very much for your attention, for your presentation.